We are live. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are Movie versus Film, a video podcast which explores the many different ways in which stories are told. And today we have a very special guest, Nathan Jones, movie YouTuber, joining us to discuss these great Bergman masterpieces. We've got Winterlight, Scenes from a Marriage, and Wild Strawberries. Nathan, thanks again for joining me again.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been a bit since we've talked last, but I'm excited to finally talk about Bergman again. I haven't talked about Bergman in a few years, actually. When I picked up this box set from Criterion a few years ago, I actually had a friend who also has a YouTube channel, and he does really well with it too. But we were exploring the curation that Criterion put together. We were actually looking at all of the pieces and all the pieces of the Bergman set, and we got all the way through opening night, which is like 9 of his films. And we kind of stopped right at opening night, which is Scenes from a Marriage, which is what we're going to be talking about today. One of the films. But yeah,
I saw those videos. Yeah, they were. I was wondering. I'm like, what does opening night mean? So it's just because the box set is curated that way.
Yeah, it's curated, I guess, in a way that has like thematic
I see.
to it, and also kind of just puts you on a roller coaster of emotions, because as Bergman films do.
Yeah.
So it's really nicely set up. Like the opening night has a lot of like Summer with Monica, Smiles of a Summer Night, Wild Strawberries. It has maybe some of the lighter tinged Bergman films, I would say. Some of his comedies, and then I guess it goes straight into Scenes from a Marriage, to one of his heavier ones, and then into the thicket of it all. But yeah, it's a really cool box set, and it's also a really cool curation. I think it's really well done. I still haven't seen all the films. In fact, I actually had to watch Winterlight for this because I still have not seen it. I know, and now I have. But
great!
I haven't seen the other 2 in the trilogy. Of the Faith trilogy is what I know it's called. So, but I'm excited to talk today about these 3 films because I love them.
All right, excellent. Well, let's jump in to Winterlight. So this was your first viewing. What would you say is the essence of this story?
Well, I will say that when I first started watching it, have you seen the movie First Reformed?
Yes. Yeah. I was going to ask you about that as well.
So actually, I had no idea going into this that, but I made that parallel almost immediately when I started watching it in the opening scene, and then kind of some of the thought process going on with our main character, and I'm like, this is very First Reformy, and then I thought about it, and then I looked it up for like a second on my phone, and then I saw that there were some comparisons, and then I'm like, all right, put the phone down, watch the movie, and then it kind of just went from there. As in, you asked about like the theme and like kind of the message of the film.
I mean, what would the heart of it? What would the heart of it really be? Like, what do you think he was really exploring with Winterlight?
Well, definitely, obviously, with it being in the center of the Faith trilogy, I think because I know that Bergman is agnostic, but also at the same time had a deep respect, or at least interest in religion, probably especially in his own country. But I think it's really interesting because I think he kind of explored it through this character who seems to be very cold and very over his past life because of his recent wife's death a few years ago. And he seems to be very lost in his loss of faith, and doesn't really know which direction he needs to go in. And he's kind of getting torn, obviously, with other characters in the film itself, and kind of just seeing like the sham of it all, and seeing whether or not he truly believes in what he's been his life's calling has been. Right. So that's kind of where I can see kind of maybe the theme of the film come from.
Yeah, it's, it must have been so controversial to tell a story about, especially in the early 60s, about a priest, particularly because he's a priest losing his faith, and he's saying terrible things like off the top about religion. Like he looks at the cross and he says, "What an awful image! What an ugly image!" But I love this existential crisis. Of course, as you know, Nathan, he was always exploring existentialism and philosophy and life and death. And here, this priest, because of what he also witnessed in the Spanish Civil War, the atrocities, and his wife dies, and where is God? He was asking himself, where are you? And you're not here. And all of a sudden, I think I heard some film scholars say, and I believe Bergman said that as well, that this really could have been, he happens to be a priest, but it could have been anybody, like anyone who's gone through a midlife crisis, anyone who doesn't know who they are anymore, anyone who's becomes depressed and cynical and is lost and has had these strong beliefs that have basically, blown up in their face, and he has these strong doubts about what he's been doing his entire life. He talks about, the mass as just being drivel, as just being words, as just being meaningless. And, he really takes his time in the church scene at the top. And you feel there's a vacancy emotionally. Like you feel as though everyone's just there because they feel they have to be there. It's, there's no music, it's so silent. And it hardly, it's just kind of like, it has no meaning. And I found that really, really fascinating. What did you think that relationship with, of course, Ingrid Thulin, who plays his mistress in that? What do you think was the purpose of that relationship for this story?
Well, it's interesting because I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later with Wild Strawberries, because they were a pair in that movie as well.
Yes, yeah.
Which is really interesting to kind of revisit in kind of years, that almost a decade later, right, for this film. But I think her character, Ingrid's character, plays a really interesting role. Hold on. Early morning coffee.
I always have mine with me, and I got water just to, you never know, right?
Yeah, I know. But with that out of the way, with Ingrid's character, I think she plays a really interesting role, because I think also with her character, she lacks direction as well in some regard, and has latched on to our main character, and Bjorn. I can't, I'm trying to remember his name. Gunnar. Gunnar, yeah. Father Thomas, yeah.
Strand. I'm probably not saying that well. My Swedish pronunciation is not the best, but Gunnar is his first name.
Gunnar, yeah. But with her character in relationship to his, I think that she is definitely looking for answers in his cold demeanor. And obviously, there's a lot of stuff that is unseen from us, that they definitely have had something going on between them. But now he is kind of waking up as the story starts, and really is despondent and really does not want to be involved with her whatsoever. And honestly, it kind of, gets to a point in the film where he kind of just breaks down and says, like, these are the things I do not like about you. And and it's a very hard scene to watch, but at the same time, it's what he's thinking and how he's feeling. And it's really hard to like any of the characters in this movie. That's the thing, is because they're so imperfect. But I think that might be one of the things that makes the movie so brilliant, because I think in all aspects of, in life in general, nobody's perfect. And there's a lot of aspects about us and the people that we know in our lives that we don't really, like, we don't always see. And I think with this one, it really does kind of show that mask of where, like, that faith can really blanket the reality of what that person is feeling. And it kind of really hit maybe some of that tiredness of being around another person that maybe is really draining them instead of actually helping them. So it's really interesting, her character. But I think there was a big purpose to why she was there, to kind of just show, like, the breaking point for him, but also at the same time for her, kind of realizing, like, hey, like, I remember one of the characters, like, kind of one of the drunken the orchestra, the guy who creates the score and stuff. I think.
Oh yes, yeah,
yeah. He comes
yeah. The
in.
guy who's got the hunchback. Yeah, that's somewhat disabled.
Yeah, he comes in drunk and it's like, "What are you doing here?" Near the end of the film, and then really kind of just saying like, "You need to just leave this town because this is just a sinkhole and there's nothing here for you."
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that moment really speaks a lot of truth to her characters and her actions, and maybe sometimes we just latch onto things that aren't healthy to us, and maybe it is eventually like there needs to be some kind of wake up call
Right.
for us to kind of get past those moments. But I think that was another one of the reasons why she was there.
You're right. I mean, he's not afraid to show people's complexities and flaws. I mean, all these portraits are so layered. I mean, every time I watch one of his films, I feel like I haven't seen it before because there's so much to discover. They require so much attention and so much afterthought. But I mean, I've seen this before, but just on this last viewing, I really thought it was interesting that we see this often in his relationships, that people can be brutal with each other. And I think it comes from where they're at in their life. And often if you look at people who are in very, very close relationships, who have very loving relationships, perhaps when we get into fights, we can say really mean things because we know there's not necessarily going to be, I mean, it depends on what you say, right? But I mean, if you can be mean, but you know that perhaps that person is not going to leave you over it because you're so connected. And even though it doesn't seem like they are, I think they are. And I think the fact that it doesn't really understand why this is, I mean, he knows why he's losing his faith, but he's taking to it in a cynical way. Whereas she knows that she loves him and she knows that he's not capable of loving back. But yet she sees through him. I think that letter she wrote, where she says she's basically going to dedicate herself to him, and you think, well, why are you going to dedicate yourself to this guy? But I think it's also because they're very, she's very religious. She's very empathetic. She sees that where he's at in his life, she knows that she can perhaps get through to him. And I think she does to an extent. I mean, I think at the end when he goes and does the mass. I mean, the whole thing takes place over a course of 3 hours. And at 3:00, he has a second mass after the first one off the top. And you got to wonder, why are you doing the mass? Because no one's there, and he does it anyway. So it's sort of open-ended. It's ambiguous in the sense that, is he just doing it because it's his job and he has to go on? Or is he doing it because she got through to him? And even that priest, to an extent, when I don't know if he was a priest, the guy who works with them with that hunchback, the disabled guy, and he talks about how I don't think Jesus' pain really was when he was tortured or crucified. I think it was those doubts when he was on the cross. God, why have you forsaken me? And that's really what, for him to have believed in God even at that point shows the strength of his character. And he compares himself to that. And I think when I heard that monologue, I couldn't help but think of the priest. I thought that's exactly where the priest is at in his life. He either can go down a deep, dark hole of self-pity and cynicism and depression, or he can, accept that perhaps he doesn't know all the answers and the mysteries of God and whether God exists, but he's either going to hold on to his faith or he isn't. And so it's quite open-ended at the end. What did you think? What do you think about that ending? I mean, you could see it in a few different ways. How did you take that? The fact that he went on at the end at 3:00.
So I actually like the ending, and I like when things are unambiguous. I like when things are not told to us, and where you can kind of connect and make your own meaning from what's going on. Because honestly, like the story goes on, but we don't know what that looks like. Just like life, really. And I think with him continuing that, and also doing that mass with only Ingrid's character there really
Right.
kind of, I think, like you were saying, kind of extends his like faith a little bit more, in the fact that like, hey, there's somebody who hasn't given up on me, even though it's
Yeah.
a little pitiful still,
Yeah.
and still I can tell he's not totally on board with it, and but like there's still somebody out there who kind of cares, and I think that
Yeah.
is important to him, and his crisis of faith, as we're seeing him kind of just continuing down the path, because that's what he knows, and that's the other thing too is, that's what he's been doing. So it's like it's hard to give up something that you are continuously doing, even if you have lost faith in it. So, for instance, I'm sure many of the people who might be watching this are either of us who've maybe been in a particular academic field or career. There's days that we don't fully fill ourselves, but
Right.
we
Right.
go ahead and go through with it because that's
Right.
what we know, right? And that's
Yeah.
what we're comfortable with, even if we're not fully involved with the process of those things. I think that's telling as well, because it's hard for humans to give up on something that we've been doing for a while.
Yeah, no, very well said, and I think that really speaks to the fact that this could be anyone. I don't think you have to be religious to relate to this. It's like he happens to be a priest, and the themes happen to be about one losing their faith. But I think anyone at a certain point asks themselves, "What the hell am I doing with my life? Am I wasting my life? Why haven't I done this? Why haven't I done that?" I also think it's extraordinary that for all the content that we're talking about, all the themes, all the complexities and meanings, so much of that is not told necessarily in the dialogue. I mean, somewhat, but a lot of this is just the fact that he shot that mass and that one person is there. And that, of course, brings the audience into start to think, what does that mean? Why is there only one person there? Why is he going on? And you give your own opinions as to that. I mean, Bergman, he either really uses the medium, or he has did, like in Scenes from a Marriage, which we're talking about next, where it's all on the text. So much of it is on the dialogue and what they're saying, and also, of course, what do they mean by what they say. But I find it fascinating how much he says with those close-ups, how much he says with the ways in which the characters are responding, the ways in which they're looking at each other, what they're doing, and so on and so forth. I mean, what did you think that did when he saw the Max van Sydow, of course, commit suicide? Of course, he read that there potentially could be a third world war, and the Chinese are making nuclear arms, and he just thinks that life is pointless, life is awful, and he's suicidal and he's depressed. I mean, you don't necessarily know he's suicidal. He's deeply depressed. What do you think that did to the priest?
I think it's interesting because that character added a lot to the doubt that he had. But also maybe at the same time, because Max von Sydow, ended his life, I think in some weird regard, and also like because of the way the events kind of turn out, and also talking to Ingrid's character and really kind of just getting involved with that, is you kind of see where, because how things are structured, like I think he emboldens his faith a little bit more in humanity, even just a tad, even if it's like almost cyclical and something that just continues on and on. And I think that's another reason why it's like either you give up or you continue with what's going on. And I think he chooses to continue it because it's more comforting, but also it's interesting with that character who ended his own life. I think it's when I first when his wife was there kind of consulting with Gunnar's character, I think it was interesting that I almost kind of laughed a little bit on why he was suicidal, only because I was like that's a really silly thing to get hooked up on.
It seems very extreme. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, and I know that obviously, because I mentioned First Reformed earlier, there is like a connection there with that film as well, with environmentalism, and also kind of just seeing the destruction of the earth. Right. a little bit. And there's even a character in that film that, the priest confronts and talks to them about their extremist views like that. And it really kind of just, I think a lot of those parallels. And I think along the lines of those people who almost seem so lost in their own worlds that like they can't be helped. And even though like the one job of Gunnar's, like his job is to help others and to like, obviously to say the good word, and to make sure that people understand. And if he doesn't totally believe in it, this person clearly could see through the questioning that he was having in his own mind and can see. And I think that really kind of solidified the fact that he was going to end his own life. Is because he could see through, the doublespeak that was happening, and he could tell there wasn't sincerity behind his own words, and so therefore, he ended the way he did, and I think that might have shocked, Gunnar's character a lot, and just really kind of opened up to where I think that's where his pain and where he unleashed it on Ingrid's character a little bit later, I think really came out because of that.
Yeah, and I thought that as well, and I think I'm not sure if you watched did you watch the documentary? I don't know if it's on in that box set, but it's on the Criterion channel. Ingmar Bergman makes a movie. It's like a 2-hour documentary on the making of this film, actually. And he says that he came up with this idea because he met a priest someone came to him that was depressed, and he felt he didn't help him enough. And this guy had committed suicide, and that got him interested in telling the story. And that's what happens. I mean, he doesn't know how to help him. He kind of brings it back to himself. He tries to relate to him in the fact that, well, I saw so many atrocities, but he doesn't say anything positive or optimistic. And I think you're right. I think it shocks him, but I think it also reminds him of his purpose in life, that, we all have these problems and crises, and that it's really his duty and his job as a priest, as a man in the priesthood, to go out and help these people with his wisdom, because that's what he's ultimately been taught with his religion, about love and faith and so on and so forth. And he totally can't. He can't. And I think that also reminded him of, okay, maybe I don't know whether there's a God or an afterlife, but I know what I can do right now. That's how I took to it. But again, no one says any of these things. It's just like, it's just, there's a suicide. There's a scene where he's, as you said, in the schoolroom, because she's a teacher, where he really unleashes on her. And then, a little later on, he's back at mass. So you really have to connect the dots. I mean, I love how much he includes the audience in participating in the making of the story, in the meaning of the themes, and so much of it, you can fill in your own blanks, in your own opinions, and I honestly don't think anything can really be wrong. I mean, someone could say that this is totally cynical, and the guy's just going on at 3:00 to do his mass because he has to, and you know what? I can't really dispute it. But I don't see it that way. I think it's more life-affirming than that. But I can see how that would be valid. I mean, he doesn't tell you anything where that would be totally wrong. So I find that quite fascinating, in a film. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, I like you said earlier, like the lack of score and like the cinematography, and I guess the unspoken nature of it all. I think we'll get more into, obviously, the film next that is, opposite, I guess, to an extent. It's those are the types of, like, I guess, transcendental type of films. That Ozu, Bresson, and all the stuff that Paul Schrader really, really liked. Clearly, with why he obviously put when we made First Reformed, like clearly this is like an imprint of that. That's what those are the films that, I mean, once you pay attention to it and you really interact with the form, it's really interactive, and also you can kind of come up with your own kind of thoughts about how things go, and there's a lot of interpretations, and I that's the beauty of a film like this, I think.
Yeah, it's really challenging and requires so much from an audience. And as we explore on this channel, movie versus film, talking about the differences when everything is fed to you, that you can just sit back, put up your feet, and listen, eat popcorn during. But you can't eat popcorn during this. You can't even chew during this. It's if you start to trail off, you can miss so much and be just so much about the psychology of the characters you'll miss, and you'll have to go back to it. It's interesting you brought up First Reform, because I wonder if Paul Schrader had to actually get the rights to, because it's a borderline remake.
Yeah, no, there's so many connections with it.
So many.
Yeah, the couple, and like the opening and book ending scenes. So it's
obviously there's differences.
Yeah, a lot of differences.
But there's a lot of jarring similarities, and I thought it was quite fascinating how he used climate change as the why that character was so depressed. Like, well, what's the point of living? No one cares about the environment, and that speaks to the problems of today.
Right, exactly.
And Winter Light spoke to the problems of the early,
right.
Yeah, of the early 1960s. I actually knew someone. I could understand why you would say, you laugh that the guy would get so depressed over that. I actually knew someone because I used to live in England for a while, and I knew a guy from Paris, and his brother committed suicide over similar reasons, in the sense that he was looking at everything in the world, and the problems hit him in such a way that he couldn't live. So I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Not interesting. God, I'm so sorry that his brother died.
Of course, yeah.
But I find it fascinating that when sometimes we become so in tune with the world, some people feel that they can't live in it.
Right.
And I haven't seen that in any other movie. I thought that was quite unique. And it's just phenomenal. The lighting, the cold, they intentionally shot in the gray, cold,
the cold. Yeah.
This doesn't have those great landscapes and beautiful. It is beautifully shot, but it's much more bare bones. In that one, of course, Winter Light, just that one light hitting him through the window so often. It's a remarkable film. Were there a lot of, because I don't have that box set, but are there a lot of special features on the DVD?
So actually,
or the Blu-ray you have? Sorry,
you're good. So let's see. There is a page with all the special features. With Winter Light, this one has introduction from 2003, which is something that I think he did with a lot of his films.
Yeah, those are on the Criterion channel.
Mm-hmm. There was a interview with Peter Cowie, recorded in 2003. Ingmar Bergman Makes a Film, the 5-part documentary on the production, like you were talking about. The trailer and then a soundtrack with it. But yeah, this box set is wonderful.
Yeah. I want to get it. It's so, it looks so incredible. I know a lot of that stuff, as I said, is on the Criterion channel, but those things can come off those streaming services at any time, right? So the fact that you have a beautiful physical media disc of it is something else. But apparently, if you ever get a chance to watch that documentary, the guy who is disabled in the film, he's not necessarily based on anyone psychologically speaking, but there was a guy who worked with Bergman for years in props who became somewhat disabled over some rare disease he had, and he was still working. He worked on Winter Light, and that actor actually modeled the way in which he moved. And they interview him on the documentary, but he was Bergman's prop master.
Oh wow!
But there's some fascinating interviews in terms of he saw God as people's security. Not
Right.
that didn't not believe it, but it's like, again, you're secure in where you're going to go. And, we live in a world where people thrive and need and security, or they panic when we don't know something.
Exactly.
And that speaks to religion as well. But yeah, I mean, and it's not very long. It's like an hour and a half. But
Yeah, it's really short. Not that long.
yeah, beautiful, beautiful film. Is there anything else that you wanted to add on Winter Light?
Not necessarily. I'm just excited to watch the other two films in the trilogy, and kind of it's weird because, like I said, I've been going in order of the curation, so I had to jump a few films to get to this one.
Okay.
But that's perfectly fine. I mean, I'm going to revisit it again, and hopefully in a good mindset too. Because definitely you have to be in a mindset to watch this movie. That's for sure.
Yeah, all of his films for sure. The trilogy is this and Seven Seal, right? What would the third one be? Okay, no, it's not.
The trilogy is, let's see,
Virgin Spring, maybe.
Nope. It's Through a Glass Darkly and The Silence.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I saw The Silence. I definitely haven't seen Through a Glass Darkly. I still have to see that one. Okay, very, very cool. But sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, but the films you mentioned, like, I mean, those would lead up to this, because this is 61 to 63. Virgin Spring was 1960. Seven Seal was 1957. So obviously, it was leading to things like this.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Going on to Scenes from a Marriage, of course, with Liv Ullmann and Erland Josephson. It's in the title, right? But what's what's the heart of this to you? What do you think he was really exploring here?
I mean, to really kind of put it in like a very simplistic terms, just human relationships and like kind of that ebb and flow of love. Honestly, I think it's love.
Yeah.
To me, I think it's interesting that we're kind of sold this idea, not just from like Disney, but like from just growing up, that love and marriage and caring about other people has to be a certain way, which I think ideally we want things to go the way that we expect it to kind of try to be. But there's a lot of hurdles, and that's really, really difficult. And that's what this movie kind of showcases in various forms, and obviously through various scenes, clearly in the name, which is really interesting just from the fact that when you love somebody, you do really bizarre things, and those bizarre things can either hurt or even like hinder or even help that relationship. And so when I watched Scenes from a Marriage, I actually watched the television series a few years ago. That was my stopping point, and it was actually a really hard stopping point because it's a very difficult movie or TV series to watch because it's very intense. And once again, this one's dialogue heavy, like we kind of alluded to, and you have to pay attention to really kind of understand how everything's going. And with that, like I said, it was a stopping point. So it was a really difficult part for me to stop because it's very intense, and it's a very intense film or TV series. I keep saying both because there is both. Yeah. And so when we were talking about doing this, talking about 3 other movies, and we picked this together, I was like, okay, good, because now I can watch the movie and I can like revisit it and like kind of refresh my memory on it all. And obviously, there's a lot of parts that were cut out for the differences there, and
it's talk about half of what the series is in terms of length.
Right, and it just really kind of it scraps out a lot of the like really getting to know either one of the characters on their own, and it really kind of sticks. The movie kind of just focuses more on like them, those two, and really focuses on those scenes that are involving them, and not their stuff when they're separated, when they're doing their own life and like kind of trying to figure out themselves. And but the theme of this, I think, to me, is love and the overall arc of things. But that idea of relationships aren't always as ideal as we think they should be, and we never truly know or understand another person. And that's the harsh thing that I think really kind of speaks at the human condition, is because we only really know ourselves, but at the same time, we really don't even know ourselves because we don't know what we want. And
that's right.
You have to kind of discover that with another person sometimes to kind of, sharpen that self-image, but also like how you interact with other people. And I know I'm going on a rant, but
not at all.
That's kind of what I viewed this movie as. But that's all I got to say for right now.
Yeah, it's so, you're right. I mean, these questions of love and marriage and whether one can sustain love for the rest of your life with one person. And I think he was really, I mean, here's a guy, Bergman had so many divorces and he had many children. I was actually fortunate 2.5 years ago here in Toronto. Liv Oldman was interviewed, and I was fortunate to have gone. And she said he was a horrible father, and I've read that as well. Like he was, he's not unlike some of the fathers you see
in his movies.
In his movies,
right.
And which was a contradiction, because apparently, as you looked at with Fanny and Alexander, he understood children so well, but yet he just wasn't there for any of them, really. But in this film, these questions, I love the build. I think it has a beautiful build. I mean, I think they don't think they have any problems. They don't necessarily know themselves, emotionally speaking. And, off the top, they're being interviewed and profiled about like a good, marriages that are good. And you get a sense that they're hamming it a little bit. There's not the actors, like the people.
Right.
They don't really quite know what to say. And I think that starts to peel an onion. And then, of course, you see him with that woman he works with, and he's asking her about his poetry. And she says, why don't you show your wife? And he doesn't know why he doesn't show his wife the poetry. And then, of course, with Bibi Andersson and her husband, they're friends. And that scene is also brutal, and their marriage is awful and obviously on the brink of divorce. I mean, that scene is so brutal. The way in which everyone's so drunk that, of course, everything comes out over the littlest things that someone said, then, unleash this fury of resentments, and they said awful things to each other. And I think that really makes them, right after they leave, they say, well, can two people be together? I mean, they're open with each other about maybe things that they're thinking that some maybe people don't want to tell their spouses, but they're open with that. And I think they've been sleepwalking through the relationship, and then from there it's like, well, the sex isn't the same, it's getting stale, and then boom, suddenly he's gonna leave. He's having this affair with this younger woman. And that scene, I mean, to me, that was the best scene in the film, when he comes and says he's gonna go, the dinner, and when he says he's going to Paris with her, and she doesn't realize that it's going to be for like almost a year. In that moment, when you have to wonder if, because I know that he was working more in a documentary fashion, a camera reacting to the actors. You got to wonder when the camera operator was zoomed right into her face when he says, I'm going to be gone for 8 months. And you see like the way she responds in like panic and pain. It's some of the best acting you'll ever see. I mean, it was so. Every time I see it, I'm like, it's like someone threw a ball in your chest. I mean, the performances are great. It's so amazing. And I think even when he suddenly snaps, I don't think he was angry at her. I mean, he's angry at himself, his shame. Yeah. And she responds in such a peculiar way.
I know.
Like, well, I'll help you pack and stuff.
Right.
I thought maybe she was saying that because maybe part of her was excited for the freedom now. I thought on some level, because she's like, I'll help you pack. And then like he starts to say he's ashamed, and she cuddles him, and then she begs him not to leave. I mean, so much happens in that scene on an emotional level. but it's just such a, it's so, like, it's another film that it's all on the dialogue. It's all what they're saying to each other. Bare bones, production. I know it was really low budget as well, but yeah, I mean, it just everything just comes right, and it has everything. It has love, cheating, jealousies,
Comedy.
uh, the whole journey of a marriage. I also thought, why do you think they carried on with, like, even after they were divorced, then they were like, still sleeping with each other occasionally, and then going off with each other when they remarried. I mean, what do you think he was saying there about them?
I mean, I think it kind of goes back to when we were talking about with Winter Light. It's kind of hard to quit things that we know, and
Right.
it's also just hard for us to get over something that, maybe this is something that all of us do. I think all of us kind of tread over like what ifs, and a lot of us kind of think about like, well, what if I, attempted this, or maybe if we're just, not around each other all the time, like we can work this kind of thing that we still kind of carry each other for, put back some excitement, like, they're sleeping together,
Yeah.
outside of their marriage, like that brings them. I honestly feel like they're closer in that regard because they're not together all the time. And because of that, like they can have that
Yeah.
degree of separation.
It
And
becomes taboo, right? And they're like getting aroused by it.
exactly. And
Yeah.
but it's interesting because we're definitely in like the society that we live in, definitely kind of geared towards this monogamous kind of thing,
Yeah.
which, for better or for worse, it can really make things really complicated and very interesting in the fact that, certain things, depending on the relationship, can get really dull and really boring.
Yeah.
And it kind of just shows that, like, hey, just like it's almost like you were saying earlier, it's a little autobiographical with Bergman, because like obviously his marriages and divorces
Right.
didn't end super well, but he worked with Liv, and he worked with a lot of his
Yeah, because they were separated at this point, right?
Yeah.
And they had already done Cries and Whispers together, and Face to Face, and so I mean, I can understand it's hard to stop working with when he's writing these amazing parts.
Right. And
It would be hard to stop working with him.
Exactly. And I think it's weird because, I mean, clearly they still have a relationship in some regard,
Yeah,
but they're not together, you know? So
exactly.
it's that separation that happens where it's like, hey, I still like being around this person. It's just, I think it speaks of the strength of, everyone involved, really. Liv Ullmann in particular, not just in her acting, but just the strength of her character, and probably real life, just showing that, like, hey, I can be above this thing that, may have happened between me and Ingmar. I mean, obviously, I have no idea about their relationship.
Right.
And I can't speak on that, but I think it is power to kind of separate that and be a part of something, and like be and really kind of represent something that is a little bit biographical, probably in some extent.
Oh, yeah.
And really kind of nail it and hit it out of the park. And I think that's really telling about how wonderful and powerful these films are. So
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I always find it interesting if you look at the dynamics between the men and the women in his films. The women are always more emotionally mature and grow much more and are less cynical. For example, you see, like, in this film, she grows. She goes on to, here's someone who was a dutiful daughter. You see that phone call early on with the mother, like, ooh, how am I going to tell my mother we're not going over for dinner Sunday? She was like terrified. And she takes care of the kids and so on. And she was a common housewife, but she had a job as well. And then she goes on to start again and have a fresh life and gain perspective on the marriage that failed. And you see that scene where it gets violent between them when they finally sign the divorce papers. He's the one who becomes jaded and cynical and broke, and now he's not even happy with the woman that he left Liv Ullmann for, and he wants to go back to her, and she's like, no, and she goes, you know what, I was always too empathetic and compassionate towards you, and of course that led to his violence and his rage that, just like you saw in Winter Light, they unleash, unfortunately, on the person closest with them, and it's often the men
Yeah.
who are like that. And I think he really understood that perhaps men have a much harder time grappling with these kind of feelings and this kind of growth, and women are better at it. That's how I took to it. I don't know if that stood out to you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I mean, obviously, we'll talk more about Wild Strawberries too, because with the character,
That's
with
right.
his niece,
Yeah.
Victor's niece, that like she's probably like the strongest character in that movie, which
Yeah,
I
she
think.
is.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I think something I've noticed with a lot of Bergman films, I haven't seen. I have only seen probably about 12 of them. But something I've noticed with his, female characters are they're just absolutely spectacular, and they really
They
do.
are. Yeah.
They kind of just even though a lot of his films are centered around men, right,
Yeah.
and like their kind of journey, and obviously that's
Right.
what a lot of the films that we picked for today are like. They're centered around
Yeah.
like men who are like having some kind of crisis of some sort,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
kind of lashing out and taking it out on the people around them
Yeah.
in some regard. And I think that's really interesting. That really kind of illuminates those characters. Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. That I like Liv the most in this journey of everything, because Johan, it's like almost, it's really weird because to me watching it and thinking like, you are making all the mistakes, man. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
Like why are you going through with this? But at the
He
same
causes all
time,
the problems.
right?
you
And
know,
I mean, even in Saraband, which I actually watched
I
after,
haven't seen that yet. The
yeah,
sequel, right? Yeah.
it's interesting. It kind of talks about the consequences of their lack of care for their children. And
Right.
you kind of alluded earlier with Ingmar not having a great relationship with his kids, and I
Right.
honestly think that has a lot to do with, like, because it was his last film, has a lot to do with him regretting that fact that he wasn't as close with them as he was, and so he revisited
Oh
these
yeah.
characters
Yeah.
in their later years, kind of seeing that. And honestly, you'll probably watch it and see like how that kind of ends up. So
Yeah. Yeah. I have to see that. Yeah. I can't. I couldn't help but think of the connection with his own life in so many of these movies as we're talking about them. And by the end of Scenes from a Marriage, I was finding I was getting tired of these two characters. And he even said that. Because you see them at that point. I'm like, what do they're remarried to someone else, and they're still going off to some cottage having these affairs. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm so sick of them at that point. But then you understand that they are, they're kindred spirits. They're bonded forever. I mean, I think they are actually truly in love. I think all these things happen because their love was tested, or perhaps the male, the husband, played, Erland Josephson brilliantly. I just think he just made one too many mistakes. I think he's sort of, but he becomes clear that I think they both it becomes clear to them by the end that they just were flawed, that they didn't know themselves, that they made mistakes, more so him, but that they do love each other. I think that they could have sustained their relationship if they had been more emotionally mature about who they are. I think these things just happen, right? It's
mhm.
it happens. You get a crisis, you do something stupid, and then you think, why did I do that?
Yeah.
Again, I mean, it's so brilliant. But yeah, I've seen the miniseries twice, and I think you know, it's funny. I saw the feature last week, but I think I had only seen the series before. But as you said, yeah, the series is there's more breathing room, and you see more of them separate. The feature, there's no breathing room. It is
Yeah.
so like you have to. I watched it in 2 sittings because it's so intense.
Yeah, I watched
Uh,
it too.
yeah, and it's over a 20-year gap, you know. But yeah, it's so extraordinary. I'm sure you know that in Denmark and Sweden, the divorce rate went like
Yeah,
way
it
up
went up.
after this.
Yeah. Which Ingmar he was happy about. He was like,
Yeah, he was
good.
happy about.
He was like, good. Like, get people to like wake up. And honestly, I
Yeah,
can't disagree with that. You know, if people are kind of just sold on this concept and not truly happy, then like maybe something like this will like really kind of speak to like our character and like maybe the stuff that we're actually going through. And I think that's good. At the same
yeah,
time, it's hard. It's really difficult to go through things like that. I mean,
yeah,
obviously, I don't understand it because I've never been married, so I really can't understand that fully. But at the same time, I think it's good to make sure that people understand where they're at and like where they're going and the things that they lack, and hopefully can get some perspective and some clarity, I suppose.
yeah. And I think that's really what happened. I think again that brought. I can only imagine that it made people think about their own lives and their own relationships and how they feel about their relationships, and then obviously a lot of people were not happy and did something about it, and that's what happens in the series. But yeah, I mean, it's so extraordinary. Again, full of layers, full of discovery, and less so in the sense of as we talked about with Winter Light, you learn so much from the visuals. But this is all. I mean, this was adapted into a play, and
Mm-hmm.
it totally works as a play
Makes
as
sense. Yeah.
well. And of course, Bergman was also. I mean, some people think his theater work was more important than his film work. There's some like Bergman scholars who have felt that way. I don't really know his plays, so I can't speak to that. But it's all on the text. It's all on the way they're interacting, and those incredible close-ups that go right to the soul of how they feel and who they are right then and there. But yeah, an incredible film. Was there anything else on Scenes from a Marriage you wanted to mention?
Oh, I just wanted to mention some of the contemporary films that like this film kind of influenced. I mean, maybe the most obvious one from a few years back is Noah
Oh
Baumbach's
yeah,
Marriage Story.
right.
Which, I mean, there's a lot of scenes from that particular film that
Yeah,
are mirrored here, and I actually think it's brilliant in that regard.
yeah.
It also kind of goes between his marriage that he had, and I think that which is interesting. But then there's also behind me the Before trilogy, the Before
Oh
Sunrise,
yes, yeah.
Sunset,
That's a good point. That's a
but
good point. Yeah,
before midnight is almost
Before
very much,
Midnight.
yeah. It has a lot of parallels to Scenes from a Marriage, and has some scenes that feel very reminiscent of that. So I love those films that are connected in that sense. So it's even though all of those movies I just mentioned, Marriage Story, Before Midnight, and even Scenes from Marriage, these are all movies that are incredibly difficult to watch
Yeah,
because of the subject material and the amount of focus that is and pain that can exist from those worlds. But to me, I think they're also really incredibly important to really kind of speak about the things that don't want to be spoken, and kind of like I said, kind of get some clarity at where you're at and how you're
yeah.
feeling, what you're doing, and people you're interacting with, and I think that's really important.
And even the humor of it. I mean, I actually did find it funny in the sense that they said their sex was stale when they were married, but then when they're separate, they're thinking about each other sexually all the time, all the time. And you saw that like Woody Allen had. I mean, I know that mentioning Woody Allen nowadays is not the best idea, but of course, as we all know, Woody Allen was a huge fan of Bergman, and he had that in some of his films where a couples it would get stale, and then when they would separate, then they were more attracted to each other because they were divorced, in
Right.
those so he had those same themes in his films, of course, of death and love, existentialism, and he you can see how he would pick up on the humor, because the humor in Bergman's films is very subtle. It's very, very subtle. Even though he did have some comedies, right?
Yeah.
Not too many, but
Spies of the Summer Night. Yeah.
yes, that's right. Even I think The Magician is somewhat comedic. I haven't seen The Magician.
A lot of parts in
Uh,
Seventh Seal, like the
oh yeah,
the
yeah,
traveling, the
that's right.
traveling band. Yeah, they're all pretty comedic.
Yeah,
And even in the next film we talk about, Wild Strawberries, there's a lot of comedic parts in that movie.
yeah. Well, that's a good way to segue into Wild Strawberries, which you chose today to discuss in our these three Bergman films. So, what is it? What is it that you really like about Wild Strawberries?
Well, it was the second film from Bergman that I watched. The first one being Seventh Seal. So both these movies came out in 1957.
Right,
And really, I don't know. Every time I watch this movie, like kind of we alluded to, we learn something new from the film. It's like watching it for the first time, and it's
right,
really refreshing that way. Now, I guess the reason I like this movie so much is because it has a fantastical element to it, and I love fantasy. It's like one of my favorite genres. And even if it is grounded mostly in reality, the film is really just about an aged professor who really sees that his family life growing up, he just really focused on his career and really
right.
kind of ignored his family growing up, which later on, Bergman would see that more probably in his own life.
That's
Um,
yeah, yeah,
which, but it also pays homage to Victor Herstrom,
yeah,
who put Swedish cinema on the map, really,
yeah.
with the Phantom carriage. There's even a whole Phantom carriage nod in the film, which I think is brilliant.
Oh yeah, the coffin, yeah, and the
Yeah.
carriage, yeah,
But
yeah,
I
for
don't know.
sure.
I really like films that really kind of have a reflective nature to it, and really kind of
Me too.
look back at the things that in our past that may have affected the current situation, and really kind of just like going on this journey of some sort, like a car journey, right? It's like a road trip movie, and just going
Yeah, it is.
and
Yeah,
kind of experiencing through people that he doesn't even know and getting to know, right? Like his niece, and then also these random strangers that he picks up. I think he really brings life back to him, and really kind of just sees the beauty of like all the things that have happened in his life, and some of those past regrets and memories that he's had, also involving like his cousin that he loved,
right,
and seeing those elements, I think is really fascinating, because to me it's like there are moments in our life that we are very much like in Winter Light, where like we're very lost and we just don't know what's going on, and it will take strangers or people that maybe aren't in our life but maybe kind of in our life, to really kind of bring us back, and
right,
to remember like what it's all about, and why life actually can be, it's a life affirming thing, and really why it can be celebrated, and why we can enjoy these things and these memories that can be positive if we look at it at a certain light. And to me, I think Wild Strawberries has a really good balance of that fear of getting to that spot where like I don't know what's going on, and we're having all these nightmares and dreams of really crazy and very scary things, especially for our main character. But at the same time, being around people that really kind of remind him like what it's all about, and like why why it's a good thing to be alive. And I think that's the reason why I like Wild Strawberries so much.
it really is an extraordinary film, and this was the third time I saw it. And that's the thing with Bergman. The first two times I saw it, I just could never take to it. I could never get into it. There was always moments I loved, and I think I must have been watching it those first two times when perhaps I was in a mood to kind of sit back and be fed everything. And you cannot you cannot do that with Bergman. And again, when I saw it this time, I felt I hadn't seen it before. And you're right. I mean, I love this device in terms of going back in your life and these fantasy elements of, he goes back to his childhood home, and suddenly all his childhood, family and people he knew are there. And that, Bergman had said that that's how he came up with the idea for this film, because he had went back to where he grew up, and then he thought, wouldn't it be fascinating if I walked through this door and all my parents were here, and it was me as a child. And that is quite brilliant. And I think he's the main character played by Isaac and Victor
Herstrom.
Herstrom, Isaac. He's sort of in a position where he thinks everything is fine. Like he's going for this doctorate. He's this grumpy guy. You see him with the maid that lives with him off the top. I mean, he's quite terrible towards her, and he's sort of there's some kind of universal force that is making him look at his life, because I don't think he necessarily would have if it wasn't for those dreams and if it wasn't for his niece. Then again, he was open to looking at it, and he really is now able to step out of his life and see, why was I so focused on my career? I mean, he doesn't seem to be aware of the fact that he wasn't focused on his child. I mean, when Ingrid Thulin tells him that, you're cold and you only cared about your career, you see it cuts to his face and he's perplexed. He's a guy who's, again, like we saw with Scenes from a Marriage, who's not introspective. He was just, even I love the scene where he's at the gas station and Max von Sydow, and everyone loves him because they know the surface of his personality. And
right.
And then he kind of looks at his niece and he gives her like a dirty look, as if, like, I took that as, see, people like me, because at that point she says she didn't like him. Right. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's true. I mean, people do not like to be told their flaws, and they'll easily find ways to defend themselves or justify it or put it on you as if to say you're sensitive or what have you. But I just thought it was so extraordinary in the sense that, seeing what happened with his cousin and, that his brother went with that woman. I took that as, that's why he was in a terrible marriage, because he wasn't happy that he lost the love of his life. Was that why you think he was so bad at home?
Yeah, just those regrets that he had, and kind of like why he focused more on his career, less so on his family. Like he had to pour himself into something, probably that didn't remind him of that, and so that's where like those regrets come in. And that focus that he didn't pay attention to, kind of see like where like that shaped where he is now and why he's been so laser focused on something that's not that. And so I think being around his niece really reminded him of like, well, actually, like I wish I didn't go down this path. I really wish, because a lot of this care and love that I'm getting from like Max von Sydow and all these people he doesn't really know too well are all very surface level and all very, just because of his reputation and like his status. And really that speaks a lot to me, because I also am in the academic field. And I think a lot of it is like prestige look. And like there's like there's a chase to where you're trying to get to a doctorate, or you're trying to get to this level, like, oh, I'm an established person in this field. And along the way, depending on how you look at it, and obviously everyone's different, but you can get lost in that world and really kind of develop some very surface level relationships, and you can really kind of lose yourself in it. And that's something that I've noticed, that like, hey, through movies like this, right? And I'm like, maybe it's interesting to kind of maybe start focusing a little bit more on the relationships that I do have, and not trying to spread myself so thin. And so that's why I can relate to it a lot. For me, even though I'm not an old man, like looking back at the regrets of my life, I can just see like, okay, maybe this is time for me to kind of laser in on the people that I do have in my life, and really kind of just like tend to that and see where that goes. Right.
No, that's well said, and I think, for you it happens to be the fact that you're in the education world, so you see people chasing those statuses. But I think in every industry, I mean, even me being in film and television and theater, it's people are always chasing some status or part or something along those lines, and then we begin to react to the people who perhaps are a television star you're working with. We're looking at the who they are on the surface, the TV star, or in his case, the famous great doctor, and we're not really looking at the people. And his niece is really looking at him, not his job, not
Mm-hmm.
how everyone else admires him. She's looking at him and who he is, and that's so common in life. We never look at the individual. We look at what they own, what they have. Oh, this person's great. Well, why? I mean, I think in terms of the doctor, I mean, his escape, why he was so great at being a doctor, because that was his escape, that was his refuge from home. And like his niece said, you put all of your life into your work and nothing into your family. And again, like as we said, the females are often the ones that really tell the men, what's wrong. And I think without those strong, intelligent, emotionally intelligent, and introspective female characters, I don't think a lot of these guys would have that same growth and gain any of that wisdom. But and it's just even when he picks up the hitchhikers, I thought, why would he? He doesn't seem like someone who would do that. But I don't know if that was just for this, because then God comes up. They're fighting about whether God exists or
Right.
not. Did you think Bergman had those characters for more than those themes to come up? Or what do you think was the purpose of those hitchhikers?
Well, it's interesting because, well, one, like, I'm sure, like, probably the contemporary thought is like, who would pick up? Well, one, like, who would pick up hitchhikers? But also, at
Well,
that
that's
time,
true. Yeah.
I mean, but at that time, I guess hitchhiking was a little bit more common, and probably a little bit more common in European countries like that.
Possibly.
So,
Yeah. I think so.
and so it's interesting because there's that element, but also the themes of and the why those characters are there. I think really is to kind of showcase the naivety of youth, but also like the beauty of it as well. Because obviously she, like the main character, let's see, who am I thinking? BB Anderson. Her character in particular. She was like, I'm trying to decide between this guy or this guy, and like, why do I care about them, and like, who will I fall for? And I think that naivety speaks to Victor's character. He's just like, that's really interesting to like have that perspective, but also at the same time that youthful like energy that he's not had for so long, and
right.
it kind of just brings him back to like, okay, you know what? And I can tell, obviously, like you said, like it seems a little outside of his character to pick them up.
Right.
I feel like he would be a little bit more like spurring towards like, I'm not going to pick these people up, and like maybe his niece would be like, no, you should do that. So maybe being around her
could be, yeah,
was the reason why they did that. And
they also really admired him, and I think he likes like his ego was being stroked by them. You see, even at the end, they're like singing him a song when he's at the window. I think that stroked his ego. Sorry, you had another point. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, you're good. No, I think you're right. I think I could tell that he like once he was around them, he like opened up and he felt a little bit more on the energy, and he like I could tell he was like happier. And then they ran into that other couple where like it was like that vapid couple again, where like it kind of reminds him probably of those relationships that he's had.
Yeah, well, he says it
like,
right. That's what he says. That's like his marriage.
Yeah, it's like it's just so abusive, and something that reminds him of something. And like you could tell immediately when they picked them up, like how disgruntled and not happy he was that he had these two in his car. And
well, he's so awful to his wife too. He was so patronizing and belittling. I hated that guy. He was just
I did
terrible.
too. Yeah, I did too. And I'm glad they kicked him out. Although, like,
Yeah, yeah,
Godspeed on her getting away from that guy. So
yeah. In the middle of the road, she, Ingrid is just like, please get very politely kicks him out of the car. Just going to go to the chat box. Collectibles, thanks for your comments. Really good insight. Thanks so much. Yes, thank you for that. And if anyone has questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat box and let us know how you feel about Wild Strawberries, Scenes from a Marriage, and Winter Light. We're talking about. And of course that beautiful the way in which he ends it, I love. And he said that was the best, thing he ever shot, was that close up. And I'm sure you know this. It came at a time when they went into overtime for the day because the director insisted on being home at 5 o'clock for his shot of whiskey. Actually, did you ever see him on the Dick Cavett show, the Bergman?
mm-mm.
He tells it in a way. Because obviously he's speaking English to Dick Cavett, but he tells a story in such a funny way. And he talks about the argument he had with him. He's like, you can have your whiskey here. I'm like, what's the difference? And no, that was the deal. And apparently he was in such a bad mood that he wouldn't even talk to Bergman when after that happened. But then yet when they rolled the cameras, I mean, that close up of him looking at, and I love that shot of the parents when he was, he's looking back on his parents. It looks like a painting. You got that fishing pole out, and they're just kind of turned their head. It's just like this beautiful image. And, it says so much about, I don't know, I don't know, because you saw with his mother that scene that he didn't necessarily have a very good relationship with her either. And, Ingrid saw that as well. Like you see the way Ingrid looks at her, like, oh God, like, okay, like if you're cold, like the mother's cold, the father's cold, and so is the son. So, she's trying to put this all together. Like this is going to affect, of course, she's pregnant. This is going to affect my child. And I really admire that she does something. She's really doing something about it in terms of being honest with the old man, and in the hope that he'll change. Did you when he looked at that clock and he sees that the hands are off it? I know that made him think of the dream he had. But what do you think the two dots? I mean, obviously that's eyes. What do you think it was with the eyes? You kept seeing eyes in those dreams. What do you think he was saying with that?
That's one of those things where it's like there's a lot of probably interpretations for that.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it was just probably, at least how I see it, maybe with that particular dream sequence is like running out of time. And then, just kind of, peering over his life. Those eyes are just like looking over like what's left. And
that's what I thought too.
That's kind of how I see it. But yeah.
Yeah. And, that's true. I didn't think of that time running out. And of course, there was no hands left, right, to even tell the time, which says, if you don't, you're gonna die confused about this relationship with your son and your wife, and why you were so focused on your work and not much focus at home. I also love that scene with Ingrid Thulin and this is the same guy from Winter Light, Gunnar Bornstrand. Again, just the way in which he reacts to finding out that she's pregnant, and just saying he wants nothing to do with it, that he doesn't even want to have any reason to live another day because he's going to be a father, and that he lived in a household that was so awful. That another scene that just hit right in the gut as to these familial relationships being so poor. But of course, later on, he's in a much better spirit. I mean, he doesn't really explain as to what happened, but that happens in life all the time. We can react very badly, and then later on have some clarity. And he says, I can't live without her. So if she wants a child, then I'll do it. Is that how you interpreted that?
Yeah, I think that last scene with his son, kind of just him coming to grips and trying to like kind of mend that relationship a little bit. You could sense that, and then
Yeah,
I think it's interesting because yeah, with time can heal things, right? And a little bit of clarity can come through. But I feel like there could be an extension there with like what happened in between, like to like where that character kind of saw that. But obviously, it was really more of the niece and the uncle relationship, and kind of seeing that bloom, and like him realizing like, oh wow, like I really like my niece, and I really don't want my son to like mess this up. And
yeah,
think I think it was telling at like when he like was saying goodnight. He's like, "Hey, can you come back here
yeah.
for a second?" And
Oh, I
then
love that.
have a like a heart to heart for a little bit. And I could tell that you know I could tell that maybe Marianne's character really was kind of changing both of them, like for
Yeah,
the better.
that's true.
And you could tell, like when he said like I can't live without her. It's like, well, we didn't see their interactions with each other as much, but maybe because of her character and her just trying to like fix this coldness coming from the family in general, I think is benefiting them both, and maybe will like bring them closer together. And I think that's where like the power of her character comes from, not just the fact that she's powerful going through this whole thing in general, and kind of taking initiative for herself too, because she wants to be happy. She wants the child to be happy. She wants everybody in the family to at least understand each other. Like it's not about the happiness. It's just more like, hey, how can I make sure that these people see themselves and what they're
Right.
doing with the other people that they're involved with, and really kind of bringing that to light for them.
Yeah, very well said. I think that's true. And again, as we said, like with Winter Light, we it's all in the ways, not necessarily what the doctor is saying about learning all he's learned in this journey, but it's the way in which he reacts. I mean, that scene where he tells his niece, "You like me, right?" Like right before he goes to bed, and the sense of peace and calmness when he goes to bed. And you're right, when he says to his son, that debt you owe me, forget about it. Before he was so rigid in getting paid back, even though he's extremely wealthy and his son is working so hard just to, I don't know what that loan, they don't necessarily go into why he owes him all this money. It's not like he had some long monologue like, well, I was like this and I was like that, and now because of this, I learned this and I learned that. No, it's all in the briefest of interactions. It's in those beautiful close-ups, and it's in those incredible compositions of particularly that scene in bed at night, where it's not like he spoke out what he learned, but yet if you really think about it after the film is done, I mean, it's really emotional. I mean, I got choked up. And as we're having this conversation, of course, they're so thought-provoking, they're so layered, they're so complex and nuanced, and explore these relationships so much that, yeah, I mean, we could talk about this, endlessly. But yeah, I mean, I really, really loved it. Apparently it was Stanley Kubrick's second favorite film.
Yep. I read too.
I'm not sure if you read that, but yeah, extraordinary. Just before we wrap up, I was actually curious if when you started watching Bergman films, did you immediately take to them, or did you sort of grapple with them, and how did you take to it at first? Was it hard or easy?
I would say maybe the middle. It's interesting because I watched Seven Seal the first year of my college career, and so right as I was exiting my teens, so that's probably when I watched Bergman for the first time. And I don't think I fully grappled with it, because I think at the time I was definitely more into movies. I guess if you put that term of like those things
commercial movies.
Right, and would focus more on the spectacle and those elements that entertained me. And so I think when I watched The Seventh Seal, and I absolutely love that movie because it was actually the second Criterion that I own, that I had in my collection. I still have it, actually. It's in that box set, but I also have it physically as a disc itself. But that movie really kind of opened my eyes. And then, like I said, I watched Wild Strawberries probably not a few years after that, maybe a little bit midway through college. And then I started watching Bergman a little bit closer. And then this box set came out. I think I had seen Persona, maybe was the other film that I watched from Bergman, which was very different, obviously, than both Seven Seal and Strawberry.
Very different, yeah.
But now that I have the box set, and now that I've explored at least a good chunk of it, but not like the whole thing, I'm still on my Bergman journey. That I'm really starting to appreciate it as more time passes, and the older I get, I'm seeing a lot more with these rewatches or even new first time watches. I'm really kind of exploring the themes and the depth of his characters, and just finding it fascinating. And I also, luckily I'm in a spot right now where I am a little bit reflective, and this was a good time for me to jump back into Bergman. And so I'm very happy that I have. And that's kind of my initial memories of going back and thinking about the first time I watched it. What about you?
Well, for me, I say if similar. I saw Seven Seal when I was 18. I didn't quite. I was kind of like, it was like there was always moments, but I was just, again, when we're being fed and being accustomed to a certain storytelling, which was the traditional Hollywood narratives, I just couldn't quite understand it. These themes of death and existentialism and crisis of faith or crisis of your own, where you're at in your life. I was just way too young. But then they just they stay with you. Same with Scenes from a Marriage. I think I saw that when I was 20. Again, just loving the performances, but not truly understanding the content. But yet just being drawn to it and wanting to go back. Like I said, Wild Strawberries, I never really cared for the first two times I saw it, and then just when I'm watching it the other night, just really loved it. Persona, I always loved. That's one of my favorite Bergman. I love that. I think when there it is. Yeah, when you asked about when you interviewed Steve and I, top 10. I think I mentioned that in the top 10. One of my favorite films. That one I always really loved. But yeah, even Winter Light, I thought it was okay, and then I went back to it, and then I would love it. So similar, I would always be sort of like meh about it, and then I would be like, oh my god, this is so fantastic. But again, it speaks to, are your eyes going to be and ears going to be perked up? Are you going to be really invested? Are you going to be really going to be taking this in on an emotional level? And then are you going to think about it later, what everything meant? And if you're not going to do that, then don't watch them. Right. Because they're going to go over your head. They're not going to give you all the answers, and they're not designed to just make you feel good. They do. They're life affirming. They do make you feel good, but they're much more related to life, not feel good because a superhero saved the world or something along those lines, or the guy got the girl at the end of the rom-com or something like that. They make you feel good because they make you realize that life is hard, but they're worth living, and that there's a lot of beauty and challenges and obstacles. So you have to, I suppose, be in a certain emotional state. And are these themes interest you? Are you interested in life? Are you interested in people around you and learning about yourself? So it certainly depends on the person. But as we can see, so much has been written about Bergman. So many documentaries have been made about him. Why do you think he holds up to such an extent? He is written about a lot. And why do you think that might be?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with just the fact that he had such a spectrum of different types of techniques that we kind of explored a little bit
Right.
with some of like his stage plays and the things that he did for like television, because obviously at that time TV was really hitting it off way more than films were, especially for the
Yeah.
culture, like not even just like Sweden, but just like
Yeah.
worldwide.
Yeah.
Um, and also the fact that he is so versed in the medium, and I think has a diversity to him. And I think at the end of the day, the reason why we like him so much, or at least to like his work, right? We don't have to like him in particular.
Right.
He seems a little cold if you like to look at him and a lot of the things he does. But the brilliant thing is, I think about all these movies that we just talked about, and maybe most of the movies that I've seen with him, it just really buckles down to thinking about relationships in general and thinking of how we interact with each other
Yeah.
and how that affects one another. And I think at the heart of it all, that's the reason why I think they're timeless, and the reason why we can watch them, even though we're not around, during this time period or in the same kind of culture either. But at the same time, a lot of these themes really can speak to us in a holistic sense, because even though like I said, we're not involved directly with that time period or that culture or these people, we can see ourselves in the shoes of these people, or at least see ourselves in an adjacent space to where we can kind of realize like some of the things about ourselves. And I think that's why Bergman is so celebrated, and he's one of my favorite directors. I definitely watching this made me think about like, man, I really do love Bergman, and I can't believe that it's been a couple years since I've really watched one of his films, because I've just been, on my own film journey, watching my all these different things, which for different reasons, right? But yeah, I think overall, like I'm going to look back and look forward to my memories with Bergman and his films, and can't wait to hopefully with other people who are watching this, hopefully this has piqued their interest in exploring more of his work, and really kind of exploring their own life too.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. Very, very, very well said. I mean, the themes are universal. They'll always be relevant, and like Shakespeare explored similar things, and that's why people still do his plays. And I think that's why people still talk about and watch Bergman's films, because they relate to every single one of us, everything that we go through. Just very, very lastly, someone who's never seen a Bergman film, what should they start with, in your opinion?
Well, it's tough. I actually kind of like the curation. Obviously, this isn't the box set. You can look it up online, because the Criterion Channel has that. I think most of the films in the box set.
Most of them.
You could do it that way. I honestly think Seventh Seal. I mean, it's the way we both started off. It's a tough one to watch, and also like kind of tough to wrap your mind around. That could be one. I honestly think Smiles of a Summer Night, which is actually the first film in the set, like is the one that's first talked about, because it's a little bit more jovial, and it has some comedy attached to it, some romance, some drama. It kind of it hints at the stuff that he would do later on in all of his other films. It really does depend on the person, though, I think, because
that's exactly it.
Yeah, it's really strange, because I mean, everyone has their own movie journey and like the things that they enjoy and things that they don't enjoy, and so it's kind of hard to kind of pinpoint like where would you start with this. But I think for my answer, I would say if you are kind of like unsure about things, Smiles of a Summer Night might be a good start. But if you are interested in like maybe exploring some of those deeper themes, I think Seventh Seal would be a good start too. But those are
that's a good those are really good options. I think even if you're perhaps like in your late teens or early 20s, Summer with Monica.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you seen that one?
Oh yeah, that's in the opening night. I love that movie, and
it's great. Yeah. It's great, and because it's about these young people and the problems of young people. So I think a lot of young people could latch on to that. It's not very hard to understand. It's not so complex. Like obviously when you talk, young people are not as complex as when we get older, we get more complicated. So I think that's certainly an easier one.
Mhm.
But yeah, these are all great choices with Bergman to start with. All right, well, Nathan, thanks so much for joining me. Where can people find you on your YouTube channel? Is it
Yep.
is it youtube.com/Nathan Jones?
Well, actually, because I don't know, I don't know like the whole thing. But yeah, if you like
Yeah,
look it up on YouTube, finding me through Nathan, just saying Nathan Jones.
yeah,
Make sure you type in like movie review or movie reviewer or Blu-ray in those sense because my name is fairly
yeah,
common, but
yeah.
also I always like make this joke that I'm not the Australian wrestler Nathan Jones.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, the wrestler comes
The
up.
wrestler slash movie actor because he's in Troy, he's in Mad Max Fury Road, the new Mortal Kombat.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He's
Yeah.
recognizable if you see him. Like, oh yeah, I know that guy. That's not me. But if you want to find me on YouTube, I talk about Blu-rays and film as well, and collecting, and those are the things I like to focus on. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm not as active as I am there on YouTube, but I'm on Twitter, Nathan B. Jones 23, I think is where, and I'll send you a link. But those are the two places you can find me.
Very cool. And I'll link those into the description box below where you can check out the great Blu-rays and movie reviews from Nathan on his YouTube channel and follow him on Twitter. And thank you so much for those of you who left comments, IP Collectibles. And for anyone, if this is your first time on our channel, please feel free to give us a subscription. It's absolutely free by clicking the subscribe button right in the description box below. And for anyone watching the replay right now, you'll see the Movie versus Film logo right here floating above my head to your top left. And then click the bell in order to get a notification every time we go live. Well, Nathan, thanks again. We'll have to
Thank
have you
you.
back to do talk more Bergman.
Of course.
Or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love
All right.
to. Yeah. Thank you
Take
so much.
care. Thank you.